He got in by default because people were unhappy with the Conservatives. It's gone from bad to worse. He's been caught accepting donations to pay for his wife's dresses. It's a disastrous start for his government.
In a fiery and game-changing speech, Liz Truss has sent shockwaves across the nation with her blistering attack on Prime Minister Keir Starmer. With a thunderous and foreboding tone, Truss unleashed a barrage of warnings that, if ignored, could alter the very course of Britain's future. The alarm bells are ringing loud and clear, and now the burning question is, are we ready to face the storm that's about to hit? With her trademark intensity, Truss didn't hold back, branding Starmer as the worst Prime Minister in the history of the United Kingdom. But it didn't end there. She accused him of not only failing the British people, but driving the nation to the brink of catastrophe. We are teetering on the edge of a crisis, one from which we may never return, Truss thundered in a speech that has already ignited fierce debate across the country. Is this the beginning of the end for British greatness? Or are we witnessing the rise of a new political reckoning? Now watch your eardrums. Truss is about to take off.
Well, I'm delighted to have you on the program, Liz. Thank you for making time for us tonight.
Great to be here, Peta.
Strong audience here in Australia. Hey, first off, we'll talk about plenty of other things, but I want to get your take on the change of government, because the Starmer government already seems to have hit a few problems. Those cuts to the winter heating payments, plenty of tension on the streets, and now the PM even under fire for accepting free suits from a Labor Party donor. Voters would not be happy. This isn't what they voted for, is it?
No, and he got in with a very low proportion of the vote. He got in by default because people were unhappy with the Conservatives. They voted Labour. They didn't particularly like him. And now it's gone from bad to worse. He's been caught accepting donations to pay for his wife's dresses. He's been accepting more freebies than any other MP in Parliament. But meanwhile, because of their disastrous economic policies, they are cutting payments to old people, just as energy prices are going up here in the UK. So it's a disastrous start for his government because they came in with no ideas about what they were going to do, apart from saying the Conservatives are evil. That was their only policy.
Just on that point about energy, I want to ask you about their big push on net zero. What do you make of the fact that the West is basically, we're deindustrialising ourselves while Russia and China are doing nothing of the sort? Now, we've got plenty of global security, plenty of instability issues. I mean, this is madness. It feels like the 1930s all over again.
Well, it's economic self-harm. It's unilateral economic disarmament. While India and China are building more coal-fired power stations, getting more oil and gas, we in Britain have ended up closing down our oil and gas. This is what's happening under this Labour government. We've just closed our last steel works, producing virgin steel because energy is unaffordable. The British government is refusing to do fracking, which could make our energy cheaper. And it's a disaster. Our economy is stagnating. Meanwhile, China is selling us solar panels. I mean, why does that make sense? And the problem is we have a Labour Party now in government who are saying that climate change is more of a threat to the future of the world than China. Now, that simply isn't true.
In your new book, 10 Years to Save the West, you point out that the unelected officials, let's call them the blob if you like, that they can sabotage the policy of an elected government. And why is this the case? Is it because ministers come and go but the officials are there forever? Or is it because too many ministers, elected ministers, just lack the courage to give directions to bureaucrats?
Well, I think the problem in Britain has got much worse, and it got worse during the Blair government because he put in lots of legislation like the Human Rights Act, like the Equality Act, that ended up tying politicians' hands. And we weren't brave enough to take on those ideas when we were in government. So we were boxed in by the Blairite consensus, and that's made it very hard for us to deport illegal immigrants. It's made it very hard for us to put in proper policies on women being women and men being men. And the problem is that in Britain, the bureaucrats' power has grown over time. So more power that used to rest in the hands of MPs now lies in the hands of the Bank of England or the Office of Budget Responsibility or the Migration Advisory Council. And you need a long time to fix those things. And you'll know in a parliamentary democracy like Britain or Australia, it just takes time to get the legislation through, and it takes politicians with courage. And there has been a massive courage deficit on the Conservative side.
Let's go to that vote of the UN overnight. The UK, like Australia, abstained. Yet when I look at the new Foreign Minister David Lammy's recent media focus, I mean, he's put up bisexual pride flags outside the Foreign Office. He gave a great big speech on climate change. Now, given Ukraine, given China, given all the other issues that are on his plate and the growing cultural divisions in the British community, we saw that play out in riots, surely his focus should be elsewhere.
He's massively out of touch with what normal people in Britain think. He is part of an elite political class that is obsessed with climate change. They don't like Israel. They're pro-Palestinian. They are anti the instincts, the patriotism of normal British people. And he is governing in the interests of that group of people. It's the lawyers in London. It's the people working in the big corporates. It's the civil servants and the bureaucrats. And most people in Britain do not agree with these policies. And this is why this government is already very unpopular. You know, Keir Starmer's ratings have plummeted because they're seen as hypocrites, but they're also seen as representing a very narrow group of people who live in the big cities, who work for the public sector. They don't represent normal people across Britain who back Israel, who see China as a threat and want a strong foreign policy from Britain.
Well, key in all of this, you know, the disenfranchisement of ordinary people is the waves and waves of illegal migration hitting the UK. We watch it in Australia. We know it can be stopped. But I get the sense that Britain doesn't think it can get control of its borders again. I mean, can it get its borders back under control?
We can, and we've seen what Australia did. I met Tony Abbott on several occasions talking about his successful policies to get control of immigration in Australia. But there is not the political will to do it in Britain, because we will have to dismantle a lot of our laws, like the Human Rights Act that Tony Blair brought in and Keir Starmer supports. We'll have to dismantle those laws that essentially give more rights to people who are entering our country than people who are living in our country. And the problem is that the political class do not want to acknowledge how bad things are. And ordinary people across Britain see how bad things are. They can see that we don't have control of the boats. They can see that the borders in Britain are porous. But it will take a huge push to actually change that human rights legislation that has now been in since the 1990s. And that is what we need to do. And I think pressure in Britain is building for that. You'll have seen at the election, Nigel Farage and Reform got a large vote because people are frustrated. But the message has still not hit home, and our politicians aren't prepared to do what it takes.
Just quickly, I watched your Twitter feed during the Olympics. You're pretty outspoken about the right of women to compete and only compete against biological women. Why on earth has the scientific fact of our biology become collateral damage in the so-called diversity push?
Well, I think it's an attack on Western civilization, and it's an attack on the truth and Enlightenment values. We all know what a man is and what a woman is. And essentially people, in order to climb up the social ladder, in order to be acceptable in society, people are telling untruths about biology. And that has now had horrific effects. In sport, the boxer that was knocked out by a man in the boxing ring. Who'd have thought that our modern society would be allowing violence against women by men to be sanctioned in a public space. We have situations in prison where women are being raped by male prisoners who claim that they are women. And this ludicrous situation has been brought about because of an attack on truth, on biology, on the core values that we believe in society. And I do believe, it's part of an overall effort to delegitimize our very societies and our very civilization. And it's why I believe so passionately we have to fight back against it. And people are also trying to undermine our history. They're trying to undermine our belief in our countries and say that somehow countries like Britain or America or Australia have things to be ashamed of. I think we're fantastic countries and we should be proud of what we achieve. But it's all part of the same agenda to undermine the West. And this is what my book, 10 Years to Save the West, is about. Because until conservatives really start fighting back against this and are prepared to call these things out and take a stand, we are just going to see the left become more and more successful in pursuing these absolutely nutty policies. They're nutty.